From PropertyCasualty360.com, you're listening to Insurance Speak. I'm your host, Patti Harman, Editor-in-Chief of Claims Magazine. Welcome to Insurance Speak, where we bring you the latest P&C news and analysis from top industry professionals. Technology is allowing insurance companies to capture an incredible amount of data about their policyholders and claimants. The challenge for many companies is what kind of information do they have and how can they utilize it as part of their planning process to identify new risks, price coverage, and develop better products. Joining us today to help sort through the data maze is Frank Giaoui, a research scholar at Columbia Law School and the founder and CEO of Optimalex Solutions, a settlement and litigation protection tool. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure, Patty. Thank you for having me.
I was really excited to talk to you about some of this. Insurance carriers have access to so much technology now, and that really allows them to collect a vast amount of data. A number of other industries also have access to significant data. How can insurers develop a strategy to determine what kinds of data they should be collecting and how to capture it?
Well, I think the answer is in your question. Each insurer needs to choose and develop a consistent strategy to start with. By strategy, I mean a general strategy, not only to collect the data. When the strategy has been identified, then the priorities in terms of products, services, client targets, the trade-off between growth and profitability, everything is defined. Then the insurer is in a better position to determine the kinds of data which are relevant to such strategy and hence which they should be collecting. So the other question you had is how to capture this information. I think the secret is actually not to create an additional specific process. By adding a process to collect data, that would mostly be deterrent or inefficient for the actual implementation. The secret is really to use the course of any actual operation and to transform every single process so that the collection of new data is part of the process, is just done without noticing. So, for instance, the process of creation of a new client account. Well, the client themselves provides with the info that is considered relevant and important. The same goes, of course, for the process of closing a contract, right? Very often the insurer is super focused on recruiting new clients, but arguably the information provided by leaving clients is even more valuable. They know the insurance company, they know their products, the services, all the data comes and feed in the insurer's database.
Okay, I'm so glad to hear you talk about how important it is to choose a strategy because that was something I just shared with someone yesterday. So it's good to know that I gave them the right information. After the data has been collected, what steps should they take to determine how to use it effectively? Basically, what can they do with the results?
So yeah, here comes the data science. Raw data is very rich, but rarely usable as such. And insurance companies are very rich in data, among the richest, but rarely they use it as ideally they should do it. So there is a whole process from the raw data to clean it, to get rid of noisy words, noisy punctuation, that information that we cannot really use in data science. Then there is a normalization of the data, checking that the data is correct, makes sense. Standardize the data. Does it fit the dataset format? We then feed in the dataset and the data catalog, basically the inventory of all data. We curate to the particular needs of a user's group. I mean, the same data is not exactly the same format, whereas it is used by the finance department or the sales and marketing department, of course. And then, only then, we perform the relevant analysis to assist the decision, to assist the strategy. And so, coming back to your previous point, Patty, by this sequencing, we understand why it is so important to choose and develop a strategy first.
I see. Yes. So, as a data scientist, what role do you play in helping companies identify the types of data they have and how to use it? And then, how can companies use data to create a competitive advantage?
Okay, so I will start by answering the second question, if you allow me. There was this recent survey published in Willis Towers Watson report in 2019, and they show that 67%, two-thirds of insurance companies report that predictive analytics have helped reduce the issue expenses or the underwriting expenses. So this predictive analytics is really playing on the process. They make the process more efficient, more time and cost efficient. 60% we're crediting the additional insights for increases in sales and profitability. So this is something which touches both the process and arguably, if you increase sales, I can assume that predictive analytics is also about building new products that fits better the client needs. But the interesting part also in this report was only one third of the insurance companies who were surveyed reported that this new technologies had expanded into new markets and increased cross selling. So basically, a minority of those companies are using the data for substantial increase, for substantial market share increase, for substantial business model change. And this is where I think there is a lot of progress to do. We bring in this field two things mainly. One is multidisciplinary competence. So we mix the expertise, the internal expertise of insurers, with our external expertise, mixing economists, lawyers, data scientists, software engineer, also marketing specialists. So a multidisciplinary competence is very important, and also a technology platform of trust.
So, you answered my second question. Is there any other information or other types of information that they could access then?
The information they can access is really, again, depending on their strategy. And the point is really to access to the platform that can allow them to basically improve their strategy. So not only reduce the cost, but also make substantial benefit to the products and services.
You mentioned predictive analytics, and we hear a lot about the role that plays in insurance and other industries. Are carriers using it well? And if not, how can they use it more effectively?
Right. So first, let's agree that what means predictive analytics. If we assume that predictive analytics are those new methodologies, including artificial intelligence, machine learning, natural language processing, those new methodologies can support objectives, the strategic or operational objectives. Those objectives were generally achieved through more traditional methods. So if we define this as being predictive analytics, it is true that insurance is far from being the first industry using predictive analytics. Other industries, sometimes very traditional, and I think of even agriculture, agricultural specialists use artificial intelligence 40 years ago, 30, 40 years ago, by identifying the space in the lands to efficiently choose the crops for each type of soil. The same with retail industry. Retail industry started to use marketing, I would say individual marketing tool with artificial intelligence 30 years ago, 20, 30 years ago. And some more recently, of course, have anticipating the use of artificial intelligence. I think to telco, of course, telco company already 10, 15 years ago. Health industry, many artificial intelligence and predictive analytics tools are used by doctors to predict how some for instance, heavy cancer will evolve. Media industry, leisure industry, and closer to insurance, banking industry. have by and large adopted such technologies. And so we work in all those industries, and insurance companies are now coming to the same mode. Of course, many of them have adopted those technologies, but they can also improve it. So, how to your question, how can they use it more efficiently? I think there are three main ideas that we can open here. One is to bridge and share information between departments, between divisions. So basically avoiding the traditional internal silos between the company's departments. But the same apply to external silos. And let me give you an example. In Europe, we have in the banking industry a group called Eurocard, Mastercard, Visa, which is basically a common constituency of many banking companies. They have put their effort, their information, their marketing intelligence together to develop Eurocard, Mastercard, Visa, which is a credit card system all over Europe. And this is shared. So they share information. Some of the information could be considered as really very confidential, but there is a third party of trust that can share, that can manage that for them. And this is Eurocard, Mastercard, Visa. In the US, we know that, for instance, credit rating is an information shared between banking. And the question is why there is not an equivalent sharing of information between insurance companies. And there are some technological tools, around federative learning that can create bridges between insurance companies while providing security, safety, and confidentiality of the information. We can provide that also by combining the knowledge of the insurance experts with the multidisciplinary teams we mentioned earlier. So, economists, lawyers, software engineers, and data scientists. These are, I think, the three main ideas that we can open.
Are there certain mistakes that companies are making when they collect data, and how are they failing to use it to their benefit?
That's a difficult question, and I don't want to, of course, reveal confidential information. But of course, the answer to your question is very different if you do a mistake on $1 billion, and we have discussions with an insurance company, and they are very large, of course, and they have huge legal fees. It's not the same for an independent insurance company or for one department. So I would say, though, that there is still an answer to your question. Very often they fail because they did not develop any strategic vision to start with. So, I'm coming back to your first question here. What is important to start is to develop the strategic vision. And the strategic vision includes the definition of the data they need to collect and use to contribute the strategic vision. That would be the first mistake. I think a second mistake, most common mistake in our experience, is to believe that more data is always better. And I think even data scientists have actually contributed to this misbelief. Many people who are just expert in data and would not like to be working with expert in industries, so insurance industries in this case, well, they would say, we will collect the data and then we will see. We don't think that. The big data does not necessarily mean smart data, and smart data means just relevant data in the prospect of the strategy and in its implementation. So coming back to the strategic point, this is really a recurring point as you hear in my mind. Maybe the third mistake, but this is a little bit more difficult to implement, is the lack of accountability. What do I mean by lack of accountability? For instance, the existence of a CFO or the existence of a finance department altogether in any organization, right, does not mean that outside this department or outside the CFO, nobody cares about money or nobody cares about the organization's profit, right? So, in the same way, the existence of a chief information officer or an information department in any insurance company should not stop everyone else at their own level. Of course, everyone has different responsibility to collect and use data efficiently. And so this mistake is basically the lack of culture, the lack of accountability. This should be embedded into the culture of the company, into everyday's individual actions. And maybe lastly, if I may allow, there is a need to measure the results. This is related to the third point. If you have accountability, if you allow people to collect and use the data, and not only the data scientists to do so, well, you need to measure the results. You need to incentivize people. And of course, it can be incentivized in both ways. Each time they collect, each time they use the data, you measure the data they have collected compared to the objectives. And of course, you can compensate for this type of actions and take corrective actions if some mistakes have been done. So those would be the four big mistakes, I would say.
That is such a clear way to look at it. You've given our listeners a lot to consider with this information. Is there anything else that you think they should understand about utilizing their data?
I would not say something else because it was more or less implicit in all what I've said. Be open minded. We are talking to industry experts, insurance experts. Your problems are not only specific to insurance. As we said, some problems were solved by other industries. Some problems were solved sometimes in other countries, sometimes in other time. So maybe the last advice I can give is to be open-minded about those experiences outside your industry and outside the US.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Frank.
Thank you, Patty.
For more information on how to effectively utilize insurance technology, please join us at the America's Claims Executive Virtual Leadership Forum and Expo from May 4th through the 6th. You can find more details at PropertyCasualty360.com. Be sure to subscribe to our channel wherever you listen to your podcast, either on Spotify, Apple Music, or Google Play. I'm Patti Harman, and thank you for listening to Insurance Speak.